Welcome back. Today we're talking about calls to action. We're figuring out if this is just fancy marketing jargon or it's something we need to pay attention to. Have you ever wondered why you get that irresistible urge to press the subscribe now button? That's the psychological power of calls to action, or what we call CTAs, at play. They create a sense of urgency and exclusivity that gets our brains excited. It taps into that part of our brain that fires up when we want a reward. So you're going to see things like urgency and scarcity being utilized, and this is when we see verbiage like subscribe now, act now, limited time. When we think we might miss out, we are more likely to act. CTAs provide a clear next step. What's cool is that calls to action literally give us the roadmap of what our next step should be. So it moves away our brain's need to find the next step, to figure out what's next. And instead, we can lay back, sit back, and follow the path that's just been provided for us. It again makes the process easier for your customer to move from a place of indecision to a place of decision, what we call conversion, getting them from a place of not looking at your content, not purchasing your offers, to a place of knowing, liking, and trusting you enough to do that. When you're crafting your calls to action, be mindful about all of the roadblocks, all of the things that would stop someone from making that choice to move forward with you, to take on your plan and your roadmap to get them to take that action, right? So say that your call to action involves offering a free trial. This is a great way to build that trust, to make people go, okay, if it doesn't work out, at least I didn't pay for it. At least I'm not losing something. Usually when we see calls to action on a website, for example, or on a web page or a landing page, we're going to see a button that's going to have your call to action right above it. And then the button itself has text. So you want that button to prompt their action or their response. So if you say subscribe now, fantastic. It's using positive language. I also want you to think about when you say, have your call to action, and then your button says something like, yes, I want in. And then underneath it, in very small text, you can have something like, no, I'm not interested in getting great benefits, or something slightly sarcastic like that. So at least what I like to do. So those of you taking notes at home, you remember that calls to action make us feel like we need to take action urgently. We need to build that know, like, and trust almost immediately. And we want to do that by utilizing positive language. So let's decode some calls to action you have probably heard before. We're going to break it down and look at its core elements so that you can recreate it for your own brand. I'm sure you've heard it more than once, the call to action, get your free ebook now. Why does this work? This works brilliantly. Why does it work? Let's talk about it. First, it's starting with compelling language. Starts out with an action verb, in this case, get. This makes the viewer want to take an action. Second, it's benefit-oriented. It's focusing on getting that free ebook. Everyone loves something free, and this call to action taps into that. And third thing in relation to language, it taps into urgency. When we use the word now, it taps into our desire to act immediately. Taps into that sense of urgency so that we avoid that feeling of FOMO, or that fear of missing out. So let's talk a little bit more about strategic placement for a call to action like this. First, you want to make sure that it's above the fold, meaning when you first arrive at a landing page, you want your call to action to be part of what the user will see when they first arrive at your landing page. Don't have them need to scroll for any reason. You can also put a call to action like this after a core piece of content. Say you have a blog and you have your main article, you can have your call to action posted at the bottom of that main piece of content. Again, driving eyes to that call to action. And of course, we have to talk about repetition. Ensuring that you're using that same call to action over and over and over again is going to ensure that it sticks in the mind of your ideal customers. This is also great because it gives your users multiple opportunities to take action. I'm a design junkie, so we've got to talk about design in relation to a call to action like this. First thing first, have some bold contrasting colors. These will catch the eye of users. It breaks the flow, and it's what Gary Vee would call a jab, 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 and then a right hook, kind of. One design flaw that I see a lot of people using when they're making their own graphics is that they don't have enough padding around the text. We want to make sure that there's enough spacing between the edge of your graphics and the text that you're using. It makes the reading experience a little bit more pleasant. That taps into a whole nother world of psychology and design that we could talk about for hours, but we will put into another video. What's also useful about that is that it helps users make sure they're clicking on the right thing. When you overlap your graphics or when your web elements are a little bit too close together, it can confuse people when they're clicking, and you want to make that process of moving on that call to action as seamless and smooth as possible. And of course, you know me, I love a good font mullet. That's a story for another day. But you have to make sure that you're picking fonts that are readable. Don't make your main font your party font, your font that's fun and expressive, but is slightly hard to read. Don't write paragraphs of text in a font that's confusing. Be clear and make sure that readers can very easily understand what your call to action is so they know what action to take. So bam, you make that process effortless. Let's talk about how you can craft your own call to action. First things first is be clear. We've talked about this already a few times in this video about being concise, being clear, being easy to read. This all comes down to your message. It comes down to the graphics and the fonts that you're using, and it comes down to the words and the language that you use. Of course, you want to make it exciting. You want to encourage them to take action. You don't want them to feel like it's a burden. And of course, ethically, I want you to tap into that sense of urgency. I do not want you to make up a reason that you're closing the cart in 10 minutes when really you're not. Don't fall into the category of using those false urgencies. Find a real urgency, whether it's your cart is closing at a certain time, whether there's a limited number of spaces available, whether it's a limited edition, whether it's only open for a limited time, all of those different reasons. I want you to tap into one that is true and authentic to what's happening in your brand. Now, of course, the road to figuring out the right calls to action is not necessarily going to be smooth and simple and a one-way street for everyone. There are some difficulties, there are some things, there are some common mistakes that we need to talk about. One of the first mistakes that I see so often, and I know I am guilty of it myself, but that's being a little bit too vague. Saying things like, come join us. Well, come join us, do what? Why is that exciting? Why is that enticing? Why is that going to make my life better? Doesn't seem like it is. It's a little bit too vague. Say, for example, you're a dance studio. If you say something like, come join, well, come join what? Be more specific. Say like, come dance the waltz with us. Come learn the tango. Be more specific. The other mistake that I see quite often is, well, not seeing the call to action. Maybe it's buried. Maybe it's the same font as the rest of the article. Not having a bold and easy to see one-click call to action can lose tons of sales. It can lose tons of leads. It can lose tons of opportunities for you. And kind of going off of that as well, the opposite of that is being too pushy, being too desperate seeming. You definitely want to find a balance that is authentic. There, I said it again, but that feels true to your brand. And another one is making the mistake of having too many options. That is one thing I see far too often. When you get to a page and they have more than one call to action, that is confusing. The only time you should have multiple calls to action is if you are on your main homepage. That's where you're going to have calls to action to each of your separate funnels and each of the different parts of your brand. But when you have multiple calls to action, it confuses your viewer. And a confused viewer doesn't end up buying. So be short, be easy to find, and be clear. That's my advice for you if you needed the TLDR on it. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. Make sure you find us over on our Friday Night Live episode. You can find us on our YouTube channel. And of course, come join us in our Facebook group. Links are all down in the description.